Picture this. A solitary outcast, completely abandoned by his people, somehow manages to engineer the most formidable military empire in human history. That's exactly what we're unpacking in today's Explainer, the epic, unbelievable rise of Genghis Khan. And look, we aren't just going to rehash the famous battles here. We're going to dive deep into the brilliant, brutal, and highly systematic mind that took scattered, warring tribes and forged them into an absolute juggernaut of a nation.
Now, to really understand the impact they had, just listen to this sheer terror recorded by Matthew Paris. He was a 13th century English monk, living way beyond the immediate reach of the Mongols. But even relying on second-hand information, the dread was palpable. He literally called them devils pouring out from hell, cleverly playing on the word Tartarus, the mythological abyss, to match their tribal name Tatar. To the settled world at the time, this wasn't just an invading army. It felt like a literal apocalyptic event.
So this brings us to the ultimate question we're exploring. How on earth did an exiled, starving boy wearing a wooden prisoner's collar forge a terrifying world empire? Well, it wasn't magic, and it definitely wasn't an inexplicable natural disaster as some terrified victims thought back then. To figure this out, we have to trace his rise from the absolute rock bottom to the explosive, world-altering expansion of a superpower. It's a gripping story driven by raw ambition, unmatched adaptability, and a ruthless genius for organization that would literally rewire the trade routes and political structures of the modern world.
Chapter 1. The Law of the Steppe.
Okay, we have to start by examining the brutal, cyclical ecosystem that set the stage for all of this. Think of it like a massive pressure cooker holding two deeply opposed, yet completely interdependent societies. On one side, you have the nomadic steppe. These people required lightning-fast mobility, but they desperately needed staple goods and luxuries from the south. That meant they either had to trade, tax caravans, or just conduct armed raids to survive. On the other side, sedentary China was constantly preoccupied with stopping those exact raids. When Chinese dynasties were strong, they played a ruthless game, pitting nomadic tribes against one another to make sure no single chieftain ever got too powerful. But Genghis Khan's rise? It happened at the exact perfect moment when his tribal world was finally ripe for unification and the settled states to the south were slipping into decline. He played this historical cycle like an absolute master.
Chapter 2. Blood, Betrayal, and Survival.
Let's move to his disastrous youth, which is really the emotional anchor of this whole historical epic. A rapid, agonizing succession of tragedies plunged young Temujin, that was his birth name, into a life of extreme poverty and constant danger. Legend actually says he was born holding a blood clot, which was seen as a major omen of his destiny. But honestly, that destiny must have seemed like a joke when he was just 9 years old. His father was poisoned by rival Tatars, and immediately his own clan completely abandoned his family. They left his mother to feed her children on whatever roots and fish they could scavenge, completely stripped of their traditional nomad diet of mutton and milk. He was entirely vulnerable, and eventually he was hunted down and enslaved by the rival Taichut clan.
But a heavy wooden collar couldn't hold him. One night, noticing his guard was completely distracted during a feast, Temujin seized the moment. He knocked the sentry unconscious with the very collar that bound him, and vanished into the darkness. And here's where things get incredible. Even at his absolute lowest, surviving as a hunted captive in the wild, his sheer force of personality began attracting crucial allies. A local man actually saw him hiding, noticed the fierce, undeniable fire in his eyes, and instead of turning him in for a reward, risked his own life to help the boy escape. He realized early on that to survive in this world, he needed absolute, unbreakable personal loyalty. He relied heavily on the concept of the noker. Basically, these were free companions. Take a young stranger named Borchu, for example. When Temujin was tracking stolen horses, Borchu abandoned his own family and milking duties right then and there to swear irrevocable loyalty to him. This is a huge shift. This wasn't about the old clan ties anymore. This was about magnetic personal leadership. Temujin was gathering men who were loyal to him as an individual, and that proved to be an incredibly powerful foundation for what was coming.
Chapter 3. Forging a New Nation.
Once he finally secured a modest army, which he actually kickstarted by strategically gifting a single sable skin, his masterclass in survival and ruthlessness truly began. You see, when Temujin defeated an enemy, he didn't just plunder their camp and ride off. No, he followed a precise, chillingly effective method. First, defeat them in battle. Second, absolutely exterminate the rival aristocracies so no leader could ever rise up against him again. And third, assimilate the surviving commoners and children directly into his own loyal army. He was literally erasing the old fractured tribal identities and forging a single unified war machine.
The sheer systematic scale of this dismantling was just unprecedented. Take the Tatars, the very tribe that poisoned his father. After defeating them, he literally had every male measured against the height of a cart axle. Anyone taller was slaughtered on the spot, leaving only the young to be raised as loyal Mongols. He wiped out the Jurchen nobility for betraying him. He even crushed multiple massive coalitions led by Jamukha, who was his own childhood blood brother turned bitter rival. Temujin systematically removed any possible focus for future resistance.
Chapter 4. The Universal Ruler. All of this bloodshed, strategy, and maneuvering led to a singular world-altering zenith, 1206. It's truly one of the most important years in human history. That year, at a massive assembly by the River Annen, the same outcast who had survived on roots and worn a heavy wooden collar was officially proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title that likely translates to Universal Ruler. He was now the absolute, undisputed master of the steppes. The old way of temporary loyalties and petty, disorganized raids was dead and buried. Genghis Khan completely replaced that chaotic clan system with a terrifyingly cohesive, unified Mongolian nation structured entirely on rigid military discipline. The entire society became organized for war. Troops were strictly divided using a decimal system, and they were placed under the direct command of his intensely loyal companions and his sons. Those once fragmented tribes were now a single, unstoppable force.
Chapter 5. The Mongol War Machine.
So with the steppe unified, the world basically caught fire as his forces looked beyond their borders. Now his ultimate genius here was extreme adaptability. He transformed a traditional nomadic cavalry into a highly sophisticated superpower. I mean, you can't conquer massive walled cities with horses alone, right? So they rapidly adapted. They learned to use catapults, mangonels, and even river diversion from the settled civilizations they encountered. And critically, for the actual running of an empire, he didn't rely on steppe traditions. He brought in Muslim, Naiman, and Jin advisors to teach him about complex taxation, organizing peasant labor, and the immense power of a written language. He didn't just destroy, he absorbed the absolute best technologies and ideas of the very people he conquered.
Soon, his expanding empire was swallowing the map, stretching all the way from the Pacific coast of China to the edges of the Islamic world. First, he brilliantly secured his flank against the kingdom of Shixia, and then drove deep into the Jin Empire, capturing Beijing in 1215. But perhaps the most dramatic, earth-shattering shift westward happened because of a massive miscalculation. The governor of Otrar massacred a Muslim merchant caravan that was officially under Genghis Khan's protection. And when the Khwarezm Shah refused to make amends, the resulting Mongol invasion was a war of total, inescapable destruction. We absolutely have to objectively note that this rapid expansion earned the Mongols a fearsome, legendary reputation for absolute savagery and calculated terror, especially during that implacable vengeance against Khwarezm. Entire cities were stormed, populations were either massacred or, horrifyingly, forced to march as human shields for the Mongol advance. Lush orchards were burned to the ground, and centuries-old irrigation systems were purposely destroyed. Make no mistake, this was psychological warfare on a continental scale. It was a deliberate, horrifying message to the world. Resisting the universal ruler meant total annihilation.
But in his final years, he proved he didn't just know how to conquer, he actually learned how to rule. Right up until his death during a campaign in 1227, his capacity to evolve from a warlord into an emperor is what cemented his success. Originally, he had planned to just wipe out the farmlands of northern China and turn them into massive grazing pastures for his horses. But by listening to those diverse advisors, he learned the meaning of towns, the incredible, sustainable value of a taxable, producing population.
So, the abandoned outcast united the steppe and permanently altered the course of human history. But as the dust finally settles on his lifetime of conquests, it leaves us with a massive question. How did the brilliant, ruthless, institutional foundation he built manage to survive his passing? And how did it continue to shape the very architecture of our modern world?